Welcome to Stories with Traction, unedited and unfiltered. These are real conversations with leaders who have walked through trials and triumph. In a world of AI-polished sound bites and scripted perfection, this podcast isn't about being flawless. It's about being purposeful. I'm your host, Matt Zahn. We're going to find out what drives these leaders, what's their story, and how can we learn from their experiences. Get inspired and enjoy Stories with Traction. DonJay, welcome to Stories with Traction podcast.
Hey, thanks so much, Matt. Glad to be here.
I'm excited you're here, and just what you do fascinates me, so I want to dive right in. So DonJay, when you are at a party or a networking event and someone asks you, what do you do? What's your response to that question?
Boy, yeah. I basically tell them I help clients find a healthy path forward with unhealthy money behaviors.
Okay, healthy path forward. So let's talk about that. So if you were to give me a definition of what unhealthy behaviors would be as it pertains to money, what would that definition include?
Sure, yeah. Excessive spending obviously would be one of them. I think all your viewers could name that off the top of their head. Excessive hoarding, which involves usually, saving too much, which a lot of people don't think about. Workaholism, financially enabling our children, um, having money as our identity, couples who fight about money, which usually the fight isn't honestly about money, it's about something deeper.
Sure. Oh, man, so much to unpack with what you said. So I want to start with the hoarding piece because there are very few people out there that might be listening to this thinking, I've saved too much money. So what does saving too much money mean to you?
Yeah. So what happens usually with financial hoarding is it becomes our safety blanket. We become Linus, like in the Peanuts characters. And so what we can do is say, and I was this person too. We look like the financial advisor's perfect client, right? They say, hey, in order to retire with this lifestyle, et cetera, you need to save 15-20% of your income. And we're like, great, we'll do 30. You need a 6 month worth of living expenses. I'll do a year. You need this much life insurance, whatever it is, right? We're finding our safety in money, or at least that's what we're chasing. We never quite get there. So it develops into a very unhealthy money behavior, which usually causes damage to relationships.
Yeah, safety and money, man. I just remember years ago reading stories of when the Great Depression hit and the markets collapsed, people committing suicide, right? Because again, their whole safety, their whole identity, everything about them was tied up into their finances. So when that went down, they felt like life was over. So, that's going pretty dark, but I feel like they're from mental health issues to potential suicide to all kinds of really horrific things happening when our entire safety and our identity, how we find purpose is in money. What are some things that you've seen when people really rely so much on money that it becomes their end all be all with safety?
Boy, it comes to really um, just ignoring the signs. When our identity's in money, then we can wind up, maybe we have a very successful business and things start to turn the other way. Well, a lot of people in society will look at people based on what they own and things like that, as far as, well, that person must be successful. And 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 so if we're very successful, we probably own some of those things. And then business starts to turn the other way. And those type of people might reach out to debt and really ignore, like, hey, nothing wrong with trying to grow myself out of the problem, but when I'm using debt to continue to put up this false persona of my identity, when I'm ignoring the warning signs and the dangers, that things are headed the other way as far as in my business, things like that. That's something I see with business owners. The other thing that gets really hard with someone who's hoarding money, or money has become their safety net or their identity, is especially for business owners, but also for other professionals when they retire. And then they become, what am I? What am I now? And now this thing that I've grown, this mountain, and I've watched this sand pile grow of money. Now I've got to spend on that. Ooh, wait a minute. It felt great when I was building it, but now I'm pulling on it. So sometimes what looks like a financial advisor's greatest client is really a ticking time bomb.
Yeah. Again, a lot to unpack with what you said. There's so many elements. I want to peel some of the layers back. So first,
Sure.
I remember having a gentleman on this podcast. His name was Jacob Brown. Podcast was Always Fall Forward. So to give you an idea of who Jacob Brown is, if you're not familiar, Jacob was one of the best college football players at one point, ends up making it to the NFL. Right. So that is his life dream, making it to the NFL. And he
Mhm.
gets there and he's on an NFL team for a few months and they cut him. They cut him. And he said his entire identity collapsed. He fell into deep depression. He started abusing alcohol. He goes from an NFL athlete to working at Staples for minimum wage. So he's just devastated. Now he's a phenomenal keynote speaker and he's really turned his life around. And it was amazing because he said so many times we're so tied into that identity where our identity is CEO or our identity is entrepreneur. And then when something goes away, we don't even know who we are anymore. So I think that that's really interesting. Another thing that I found fascinating was I was talking to a lady, this is in 2023, and her name's Lorraine Wiseman. She was a CEO of multiple companies, wildly successful, actually ended up doing her doctorate in exactly what you're talking about. I
Oh,
believe she's in the process of launching a book now, too. It's going to be fascinating. But she said that there are so many business leaders that they build these massive companies. And then when they leave, there's such an identity crisis that actually, again, I hate to bring this up again and go super dark, but suicide has started to creep up with baby boomers that are wildly successful. Everyone puts them on a pedestal. And then when they're no longer those business leaders anymore, they lose their identity. And she said that there's not a lot of research that has been done regarding this. The only research that they started to point to is soldiers returning home from war, where they go into a combat field, they come back, and now they're trying to become civilians again. And they're so disoriented. And I know that that's an extreme example, but imagine, building a business for 30 years. It's your end all be all. What you said, DonJay, it's your safety net. It's who you are. It's your identity. And now you retire and you don't even know who you are anymore. So what are some things that you would recommend to people that are in the process of maybe selling their company, transitioning from working 60, 70 hours a week to now being retired? What do you recommend that they do?
yeah, that's a great question, Matt. And so the first thing is to really just discover what our values are. You know, um, Most of these execs and successful people have been just these great warriors, right? Strategist, and give them a mountain and they'll take it. And it's, they've no sooner reached the top and they're looking for the next mountain to conquer. And so I think it's really looking back and doing a values assessment, what their values are. And then what I do with clients is we do a strategy where we go from about 120 values down to 5. We really do a deep dive search. And then with those 5 values, why are they your value, right? What story from your past would you say is the number one story of why that's your value? Because that gives us an anchor point, right? That gives us something to drive the stake into. And then I help them look a little deeper. Are there trends where, hey, these 10 values almost made it to the top 5, but they didn't? Is that something we should explore more? Is that something that you're purposely pushing down? And so, um, maybe art is their thing, right? And we look and say creativity. Well, it's kind of my value, didn't make it to the top 5. Artistic, kind of my value, didn't make it to the top 5. Um, Curiosity, which is a great thing that all artists have, kind of my value, didn't make it to top 5. Well, maybe that's the news segment too that you need to explore and start dipping your toe into. Um, and so I encourage my clients then to just, hey, let's go try this. Let's dream for a little bit and help them understand that it's not a new mountain to conquer. In my office here, I have a guitar, acoustic guitar, and people walk in and they say, "Oh, you play guitar?" No, no, I don't. Wait a minute. You know, and so what I like to do, because I was one of those people to give me another mountain and I'll conquer it. I purposely have told myself I don't want to learn guitar. And so what I will do is just go over there and mess around on it. I have some friends that are musicians and they've taught me how to do a little bit of Eddie Van Halen riff and a few just choruses from a song. And I'll just mess around and see what sounds I can make. Um, and it's one of those ways to have fun, have curiosity without thinking this is another thing I need to conquer. Because that's the problem we can get into when we retire. Is like, okay, now I've retired. Well, now I have to be the best artist and develop this whole massive empire. And so I'm an artist and I like to paint and sketch. And so one of the things I did in my healing was rather than have the perfect painting, I told myself, what if I could make the worst painting I could even possibly imagine? And so I actually did. I created a painting that I'm like, man, that thing's ugly. Um, um, yeah, there's no reason. And I put it up to stare at it, to be like, you don't have to perfect everything you touch. You can just enjoy the process. And so that's what I would advise people that are retiring or changing in some path to look at. Two of the things that studies have shown, two of the things that go up when people retire, two things that they increase consumption of. One is alcohol. The second is cable news. I think we would all both agree those are not healthy things to increase in retirement. So, and that's whether we're a CEO or whether we're, just a guy digging ditches. So.
Wow, man. Yeah, it really speaks to the intensity, right? I love, you having this guitar. I can actually visualize, someone just walking into your office, seeing the guitar and trying to connect with you. And oh, how long have you been playing? And the idea is that you have that as well as the painting there as a visual on you don't need to be masterful at something.
Yeah.
It's interesting because aren't we a culture that we love intensity? We love
Mm.
intensity, but yet consistency is a bore to us, right? Like if I said to you, at the conclusion of this year, I'm going to lose 50 pounds. My gosh, wow, right? That's intense, right? But if I say to you every single day, I'm going to be under a certain calorie threshold, that's a bore. Like, who cares? But it's amazing what would happen to my body if I did that. And it's amazing. A lot of individuals that I work with, especially C-suite executives such as yourself, DonJay, is they're so focused on intensity, right? The wow factor. Look at the mountain that I conquered, using the words you had mentioned, the goal that I achieved. That to really stop and be present, I think is really important. I'll never forget this. I was speaking. It was out in Seattle, so I'm in Seattle, and there was a gentleman in one of my workshops, and he had an office in Portland as well. So Seattle and Portland. He says, "Oh, I go to Portland all the time. I'm there every month." And I said, "Oh, there's some amazing waterfalls around the Portland area, right? Like, can you give me suggestions?" Because I was about ready to go out there on other things I should check out because I'd heard, and it is true. There's about 45 minutes outside of Portland, Oregon, is some of the most stunningly beautiful waterfalls that you can go to in the country. He couldn't give me any suggestions because he's never been to any of them. And I'm thinking, here's this wildly successful individual, has businesses throughout the country, different outlets that most people couldn't even dream of having. He goes to Portland every single month and he's never spent time to go check out some of the most gorgeous waterfalls. So it was another reminder to me, what are we doing? What are we building towards, right? To your point about hoarding money, my hope is that people would be able to build something to the point where they don't need to be there for every single moment of it, that they can actually enjoy their life. So I appreciate everything that you're saying. High value. Thank you so much. I do want to set my attention to the enabling children piece that you mentioned earlier. I think this is really important because I, like I'm sure you as well, have known a lot of very successful people. And for whatever reason, they're not teaching their kids how to not only thrive, but survive as it pertains to financially. They're giving them a bunch of money. They're giving them money, but they're not allowing them to, whether they're afraid of their kids failing or they're afraid of their kids going through pain, they're not giving them the tools that they need in order for them to succeed as well. So what are your thoughts on enabling children as it pertains to a really bad understanding of not only how to work and build something, but just giving them money?
Yeah. And when you get into enabling, there's so many different avenues. I had a friend who once said, if you think the answer to a complex problem is a simple solution, you don't even understand the question. And I love that. And I think about that with enabling. Sometimes we're just like, well, the child's just lazy, or the parents giving them money. And so why is that? Well, they've got a lot of money. They must want to throw it around. But it gets into it gets into sometimes guilt, right? Where if we're very successful, we can dive into workaholism, and so having this money is we'll give it as a sense of guilt. I can't be there. I can't be present. So here you go. Control can be a big one. As we raise children, and I wrestled with this myself, right? But when my children were younger, right, we could say, "You're going to eat your peas," and well, that doesn't work when they get in the teenage years. And so for someone who is highly successful, where they lead teams and on some things, right, just command, like, this is the way we're going to go. This is the path. That doesn't work with our children. And so there's this thought of maintaining control with money. And then there's trust. Sometimes people get to a certain level, and there's just this level of like, can I trust my child to go out on their own and be successful? And then there's this method of like, money is love. And so, if I give them money, I'm showing I love them. I can't give them my time, whatever it might be. And so we might think of it as this great act of love we're giving our children. You know, the child can interpret that, or the young adult, I should say, as, you don't think I can do this on my own, right? There's one client I worked with. They came to me as they'd kind of been through everybody, and nothing had worked with their adult young child. And so they came to me and said, "Hey, our child's lazy, and we're very successful. Both parents were hugely successful, um, uh, very well off financially." And they said, "We think our child's lazy, but someone suggested it might be about money, since we're pretty successful." And so working with the young adult, which is really hard when the parents say, "Hey, we want you to work with DonJay." Another thing they're directing and telling. So it took some time to gain trust, to break down some barriers. But as I explored that with him, it wasn't being lazy, but through watching his parents, he saw where he felt money controlled them, and he viewed money as evil. And so he wanted nothing to do with it. And so it was helping him rewire that mindset. And today, he's a very successful professional, but he runs also a huge non-for-profit philanthropy. And so he's found his way that he wants to use money in a way that serves his purpose and his values. And it's just a beautiful transition.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the health of that, because for someone that does have substantial resources, obviously they are able to position their children further along than they were. And I'm not aware of any parent, at least good parent, that says, "Oh, I want my kid's life to be worse off than mine." Right? It's
Right.
always, I want to create an environment for my kids that they have a better life than I did. Right? They have more resources, they have more opportunity. So when we use the word health, what would be like a healthy, happy medium balance where if the parent has quote unquote unlimited financial resources, how do they still create an environment where there is a little bit of struggle, there is a little bit of pain, a little bit of failure for their kids? So they're not just given everything, but yet they still have the reason. Like, I'm sure you have had to read studies where, and I'm drawing a blank on what this even is, but there is like a threshold where if you if you have a certain amount of resources, your kids are actually better off. But once it goes past that amount, they're actually worse off because they don't have the struggles like a normal person would. So can you define what a healthy parent-child relationship would be like if money isn't a worry?
Yeah, I think it's still showing that, there's responsible ways to use money. I think helping your child work together and say, we're going to create a generosity fund. We've been blessed with this money. Um, and having more money conversations. I think for parents, money is a lot like sex. We don't talk about it. Um, and so I think it's having more conversations about money, um, showing them that we can use generosity. So having a once a month thing of like, hey, let's put so much money in a pool, and starting out it may be the parent, and then as the child's able to do some part-time work, things like that, having them pitch in some money and say, what cause do we believe in? You know, and one month it may be hey, we're going to focus around dad's cause, and one month mom's cause, and the next month the child's cause. And so showing them that there's different ways we can use our money for good, um, but also, having them have some skin in the game. You know, when the child looks and everything we want to do outside of work, well, we just hire that out. You know, um, we have a lawn mowing service. We have someone who cleans the house. We have someone who cleans the child's room. Whatever it might be, right? We have someone who, we have our professional detailing service that cleans the car. Maybe we take it to the local car wash. Um, just chores, where the child is like, "Wow, I have to wash the car with dad, or I have to wash the car with mom. I have to mow the lawn." Those type of things help develop. And then for certain things that they want, I remember doing this with our youngest child. She was great about pulling things off the shelf and going, "Let's get this, mom." And mom would say, "Well, we can with your money." and and usually she'd put it back on the shelf. But it helped her understand, what did she really, want. She just couldn't have everything she wanted. So what did she really want? What did she really need? And then having our children have some skin in the game. So I think with our children, having them have a job in their teenage years, having them say, okay, we may buy the car, but you buy the repairs, or we may go 50-50 on the car. Um, so those type of things. And making sure that they understand that the family unit is more than about the money and success. Right? So here again, just as we tell CEOs or anyone to discover their values, are we helping our children discover their values? Are we helping point it out to them? You know, hey, wow, that was really kind what you did today. You know, um, I saw where you displayed a lot of empathy with your friend. I really love seeing that in you.
Wow. The family unit is more than money and success. There's a lot of wisdom in that for sure. I appreciate you sharing that. I want to talk, speaking of stories, I want to unpack a little bit of your personal story, DonJay. And I want to go back, not to the beginning, but I like starting with the teen years. I think the teen years are so important for us developmentally. And I know a lot of people that they're still unpacking elements of what their teen years brought, even well into their adulthood, right? So
Sure.
if I were to have a remote control and I hit that rewind button and I went back to 13-year-old DonJay and I asked him what he wanted to do, what he wanted to be, what kind of response would I have gotten in return?
The response would have been get out of poverty.
Get out of poverty. Okay, so tell me a little bit
Whatever.
more about that.
Yeah, so we grew up in poverty starting at age 8. And so yeah, so I was on the school lunch program, the free book rental program. We were on SNAP benefits. Of course, back then they were called food stamps, all those things. And so yeah, so if you talk to any of my uh, uh, teenagers that knew me growing up, if you said one word to describe Don J, they would have said driven, driven. And I was totally driven to get out of poverty. So I can really relate with people that are that way that have become workaholics because my mom passed away when I was 12. And here again, growing up in poverty, I was bullied for my poverty or for our family's poverty. And so I saw, wow, work was the way to get out of all of this. And so I started a lawn mowing business, 25 lawns a week, painted sheds, built sheds, whatever paid a buck that was outside, I was on it. And so, and it was a great way to bury all that pain of being bullied. I was able to get off the school lunch program. I still qualified, but no way was I going to do that. I was paying my own way out of my own pocket. Same with book rental. Went and bought the fashionable clothes so I felt I could fit in. And so, so this money and this workaholism became my identity, and it helped bury the pain of losing mom at age 12. There was no time to think if you were constantly busy and working and producing, and I was praised for it. Right? We're praised in society if we're like, go find that mountain and conquer it. So it just became this drug. Um, and so I can really relate to people where, yeah, we have money, we all have money behaviors.
Wow. Okay. So your mom passes away when you're 12. So around, the 13 mark into your teen years, you're in the midst of poverty. You are cutting, you said 25 lawns, you're painting sheds, building sheds. So where were you? What city or area did you live in at this time?
Yeah, we grew up in Northwest Indiana, right outside of Chicago.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to picture this. All right. So then while you're mowing these lawns and then you're paying for your school lunches, paying for clothes, did you think of starting your own business as a teen? Were you thinking about going to college? What was your thought? I mean, obviously, you work more, you're getting more money, so you're viewing that as a benefit. But where did you see yourself going as you transitioned from teen to adult?
Yeah, I really wanted to go to college. My father never went to college, and so he took a job that was unsafe. This was back in the 70s, so a lot of EPA issues back then, and uh, and so he became medically disabled when I was 8 years old. And so I thought, man, if I go to college, if I have a job that doesn't be in a, is not in a factory like that, that was our poverty right there. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, so became very driven to go to college, uh, saved a lot of money from working, thinking somehow I'm going to get there. And so studied very hard, thinking if I've got some money and got good grades, somehow I'll get some scholarships and yeah, make it all work.
What did you study in school?
Yeah, so talk about being driven. I decided I would get a dual degree. And so in 4 years, I got a degree in mechanical engineering and then also in business.
Okay.
So I graduated 2 degrees in 4 years, which here again goes back to the driven concept. But it was all out of fear. It was all out of fear. I started out in mechanical engineering. I took an internship the end of my sophomore year, and I had one of the engineers there say, well, do you know how you'll never have to worry about ever losing your job? He's speaking right to my fear. I had no idea at the time, of course. And I said, well, how? And this guy was a very intelligent person. He goes, go back and get a business degree and graduate with 2 degrees. And so I went home that night, opened up what would it take to get a business degree, came back the next day and I'm like, Stan, like I'll have to take 23 credit hours, like a semester, and go summers and take 18 credit hours then to graduate in 4 years because I don't have all this extra money to stick around for housing. And so, man, I don't know if I can do that, Stan. And he said, well, I told you what to do. And then just went back. We sat side by side and ate our lunches there because it was in Chicago. So it was, by the time you drove where you wanted, you had no time to eat. You had to drive back because of the traffic. So I just thought, I got to do this thing. But it was this whole thing of being driven by fear, right? So
Wow. All right. So then you're getting this dual degree. And then what was one of your first jobs outside of school?
yeah, so my first job out of school was I was a project engineer for General Motors.
Okay.
So
And then at what point did you transition into the financial world? Was there a big aha moment or was it almost accidental?
yeah, it was. I was 28 when I became a financial advisor, and so I worked at GM and then worked at a competitor of theirs, and finally realized like if I was gonna really be safe, if I was really going to be successful, I had to own my own business. I had to have total control of my own destiny, which is what I told myself. And so, of course, I had my business degree, and so I had started kind of dabbling in investments on my own. And my wife said, "Hey, you're really good at this. Have you ever thought of being a financial advisor or broker, as they called them back then?" And I was like, what do they do? I thought brokers were just the guys on the exchange that were back then were shouting and throwing paper and ramming people down to get their trades. And so just kind of fell into that thanks to my wife. So
And around what year was this?
that was 1995, so pre-internet.
95. My goodness. Okay. And then what were some of the things that you learned when you went out? You went out by yourself?
I went out with a large firm.
With a
Yeah.
large firm. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was some of the maybe the preconceived notions that you had, and then what was the reality of what you were doing?
Yeah, yeah. So the preconceived notion was just, if I tell people the facts, like they'll want to invest, they'll want to do those things. And I learned really quick, like telling people facts and figures and statistics doesn't lead people to change. And so stories do, um, finding their pain points and showing how you had the solution to help their pain point. And I also learned, it took me a few years, but in 1998, I learned people really didn't want to talk about the details of like small caps did this and mid caps did this and international, and we're going to shift. They really want to talk about their emotions around money. And so in 1998, that's when I started down this path of like, what if I got really good at understanding the emotions of money and money behaviors and just made that my niche? And so that's what I did. And then
It,
sold the practice in 2020 back to the firm and decided I would just do that, just money behaviors, and focusing on that.
yeah, wow. It's so fascinating how you can have facts and figures and people are more drawn to the story, to the emotional elements.
Yeah.
It's wild to me.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen it time and time again where on paper, you're showing someone, if you invest here, if you do this, we've studied all these trends, we know where this is all going. But yet, if there's not that emotional connection, if there's not that story that someone sees themselves in, it's meaningless to them. They don't even know what the numbers actually mean in reality. So I really appreciate you sharing that. So you mentioned about fear, and often when we talk about fear, we tend to talk about it in a negative way, right? I mean, fear is a powerful human emotion. People go to war over fear. People risk their life over. People kill for fear, right? But would you say there's also a positive element where it does drive us to do things we wouldn't do if we didn't have an element of fear.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we need that element of fear, and it's a difference between driving us and controlling us. And so we're going to have a little bit of fear. I think about every day where our body is constantly checking ourselves. Am I loved? Am I safe? Am I loved? Am I safe? Am I loved? Am I safe? And so that's got a fear element in and of itself, right? And so there's nothing wrong with saying, hmm, I don't feel loved. I don't feel safe. What do I need to do about that? Well, sometimes it's our mindset, right? Other things, it's things we do. So having a certain level of fear, not bad, but understanding that it's there. And most of us have fear and we don't even understand it's there, why it's there, where it came from. And that filters into our money behaviors.
Yeah. So there's an exercise that I did, and some people listening may find this silly, but I found it as a powerful exercise. So there is something to be said about an inner child, right? And there's a lot of psychological research on this, but it's amazing that there are different experiences that we have as children, as teens, and we still have an element of early childhood trauma that we just haven't processed yet. And I'll never forget this. This was probably, I want to say 5 years ago, where there was something that happened in my past that was still weighing on me. Happened when I was about 8 years old. And whether it was consciously or subconsciously, it was still it had a major impact on me, decades and decades later. So I did this exercise where basically you sit in a room, and let me preface that I am not a counselor, right? But I highly recommend people researching this, looking into this. But I sat in a room and I sat in a chair, and then I had an empty chair across from me, and I pretended that my 8-year-old self was in that chair, and I spoke to that 8-year-old little boy, telling that boy that it was okay because I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to process my emotions at that time. I didn't know what wise, grandiose path to take in that moment. And I think that was so important because sometimes we judge our past based on what we know now. But how on earth could and like you, and you were mentioning being 13 and growing up in poverty, you didn't know at 13 what you know now. So different things that you did, it's not your fault. You were just trying to do what you knew was best at that moment. But if you carry all of that into where you are today, what major disservice would you do to yourself? Maybe even decades from now, still living in the past of that poverty and what it brings. So, are there any exercises or any books or any concepts that you would point to? Is someone, even if they're wildly successful, still is living in past moments that they need to process from a different angle?
Yeah. So, good question. Uh, Michelle Chalfant does some great work yeah, as far as inner child work and things like that. So, she's a great resource. I would highly recommend. Obviously, I work with clients in money behaviors with a focus in grief and trauma, because I believe every grief and trauma has a hidden money message there. So they more than reach out to me. Um, the Klons, Dr. Ted and Dr. Brad Klons have some great books out there. Another good one, I'm going to give me just a second here. Um, it is a book to look at is Unspoken Legacy. It's by Dr. Claudia Black, addressing the impact of trauma and addiction within the family. And when we think of addiction, I like what uh, has been talked about. We have traumatic events. That doesn't necessarily mean we had trauma, right? Trauma is the message we tell ourselves about the event. And then addiction, we really want to start thinking of that as like a coping mechanism. So I think one thing to tell people, uh, tell themselves is when they have all this huge regret. Take myself for example. I dove into workaholism. Ignored relationships. Could have had so much better relationships with friends, with family, with my children, all those things, right? Um, and so the main thing to tell ourselves, to remind ourselves, is you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And if I look back at 13-year-old DonJay, that was how I survived, so that the emotions and the weight didn't crush me. So it served me well then, but at some point in time you say, yeah, but it's run its course, and I need to change and I need to evolve. And I think the other thing with regret, we can have huge regret with that. I always tell my clients, regret is something we can help to learn from. We just don't want to live in it. So yeah, you don't know what you don't know. Learn from it, don't live in it, and start thinking about these money behaviors as it was a way you survived in a time of heavy weight. It served you then, it doesn't serve you now.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you so much for this conversation. High value. I'm sure a lot of people got a lot out of it. Personally, I'm going to have three main takeaways. So the very first one, DonJay, is you mentioned recognize what your values are. And then you shared one of the exercises that you do with your clients where you have 100 plus values, and then you start scaling it back to those 5 values. You also said another thing in there that I found fascinating is sometimes there's 10 values that almost made the list, but they didn't make the top 5. And then you spend time exploring why they didn't make the top 5, that it's not just a mountain to conquer, but it's something that we need to explore. So I really appreciate that point. The second point, and this is like an immediate takeaway for me personally, is a generosity fund. Now, my wife and I have given to churches, we've given to nonprofits, we've definitely donated money, but I don't think I've ever created, well, I know I haven't, at least a generosity fund and then conversations around it with the kids, because you went on to say taking turns regarding certain causes. I think that's so powerful. What a great conversation starter, and then also continuation where I'm envisioning my 2 boys and my daughter and them having certain things that are near and dear to their heart and having a generosity fund. And I think that's a really, really powerful way. There's so many different conversations that can be had if we do that. So that is a commitment to you about me starting a generosity fund
Awesome.
and then taking turns. So I really appreciate that. And then the third and final point, it's so simplistic but powerful that you had said, is the family unit is more than just money and success. And I think that should give us great pause that yes, it's good to work towards something. Yes, it's really great to create an environment and a life for our kids that are better off than what we had, but we can't get so wrapped up in it that we think the family unit is just amassing funds and achievements and conquering different mountains. So I think, again, simplistic, but very powerful. So DonJay, thank you so much for your time today. If someone wants to get more information on what you do, or they want to reach out to you for your services, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
Yeah, so they can go to my website, drumbeatofwealth.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. I will include that in the show notes. People go just click and go from there. Thanks again. Really appreciate your time today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. I enjoyed our time together.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. If you found this discussion helpful, please leave a review, since positive reviews help others find these conversations. New episodes drop regularly, so stay tuned. And remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to take action, you must share more stories.